Hello, my name is Joseph Rybant. I'm the executive editor at Dynamite Entertainment, here with Vincent Faust, our our marketing coordinator. I almost gave him a whole different job. And joined as well by Mr. Garth Ennis. Thank you, Garth.
All right, Joe, how's it going? Hey.
Good. How are you?
I am good. I am happy.
1 year later, enjoying the end of the road of this long nightmare.
Better to be coming out than going in, definitely.
Yeah. You know, Dear Becky was one of those things that, for me at least, kind of marked the beginning and I guess the soft ending of the pandemic, because you'd written it before. We started publishing it right as everything really shut down. Yeah. At least in terms of comics and everything, but I think in the spring, early spring, late winter, everything really shut down, and then everything picked back up, and the series came out. I don't think of it in particular as being, you know, it's not a treatise on the time, but it is attached to the time. Now that it's all done, will you look back at it as a marking point of this period, or was it just another project?
Well, there are references within it to the coming of the pandemic, definitely. I think in the last issue, Huey gets home from his little investigation just as things are locking down in Scotland. So that's there. It's undeniable. It's definitely not the point of the story, beyond a few references to it. And I think you're going to find that in a great many books that are published around this time. It's not meant to be any kind of a treatise. I'm sure there will be plenty of books entirely devoted to the pandemic for us to revel in for years to come.
Yes, to remember these happy days. Was there anything else that you worked on during this time that came out? It's all such a blur. I know not for us, but for anyone else.
Not really. Last year there was a ton of my stuff collected, but anything else that came out had already been written. Yeah. Some time ago, like the string bags, or there was a collection of that last Punisher book I did, Soviet. I don't think there was really much else. I mean, as ever, I've got a ton of stuff about to come out, but last year I noticed was mostly collections of the older material, like Hellblazer, like Preacher, and so on. There was a lot of that.
Yeah, and we were very fortunate. It took 8 years. I think it was about 8 years for you to return to the boys. I think we ended the original series in 2012.
That sounds right. Yeah.
And I think every year we would ask you if you wanted to do more, and every year you would politely say, "When I have a story, I would love to do more." I don't know if you ever said I would love to do more, but I know it was always if I have a story, I will do more. And then as we asked the question, whether it be Nick or myself, when we would see you, then all of a sudden it became, I've got something. I don't remember exactly when that was, but it was probably...
I don't remember the timing of that either, but I remember the idea occurring, then the story filling itself in, pulling the team together again, when Russ became available and so on. I would say that it kind of came together throughout 2019, but it was very much a case of, as you say, waiting for the story before I could say to you and Nick, yes, I'm ready to go on this. Until then, it had really been just the idea of doing more, and there's no point in acting on that unless you've got something decent to put out.
Right. And we were very lucky in that sense, because you, with the exception of the Punisher or say war material, you generally are not returning to things that you've done prior. Big thing.
I do a fair amount. I mean, I turned into a kind of occasional episodic thing for me. I would do story arcs every couple of years. I did sort of kind of revisit Hitman. I suppose really when you're talking about the boys, the other story that comes to mind is Preacher.
Right. Yeah, the big thing,
There are various notions that I suppose link the two in people's consciousness. You know, they're two long form stories. They've both been televised. They both seem to be the ones that, in terms of creator-owned books, people mention first, you know, before they'll mention something like Hitman or Cross. And I never went back to Preacher, really, because I genuinely found there was nothing else to say.
Yeah,
it really wasn't. And now, of course, it's a moot point because with Steve gone, I couldn't, in all conscience, go anywhere near that story. Anyway, nothing has ever occurred to me.
right.
Occasionally, I have the odd sort of vague, whimsical idea, but it comes to nothing because there really is nothing more to say. With the boys, I suppose having a complete world like that, it's more a case of occasionally teasing something new out.
Do you ever find that maybe, like with, you mentioned Preacher, you might have had a twinge here or there. Do you put that into something else? Do you say, I'm not going back to Preacher, but this idea I can throw here, or do you just let those ideas die on the vine?
I just sort of let them scatter themselves to the wind.
Right.
I mean, there is, I suppose, a more direct link between the two stories, which represents something that might have happened to one of the characters. And you can find that in the St. Patrick's Day episode of The Boys. Beyond that, though, had The Boys not come along, I doubt I would have done that. That was just an amusing little idea that I did because it appealed to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And quick note, the Dear Becky trade, I think Vincent, I think you put on these notes that it was out March 3rd. So comic shops, digital, all that stuff. Comic shops, obviously, our first choice. Go support your local retailer. And a couple of other things, I guess, the projects that we're tangentially related to. One project we're tangentially related to is the Hankies collection,
Right.
That is with our friends down in Annapolis, Maryland, Dead Reckoning. They have taken the Tanky series that you did with us, with the late great. I'm not even gonna try and pronounce his last name because I don't know if it is it. Okay, it's actually then I got it. That you did with him for us in the 3 Battlefields series.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. They have taken all those, much like they did with the Night Witches material that you did for us.
Right.
And they've put it into their own collection. I think that's actually due in stores, like literally. Hopefully it wasn't on one of those boats that got stuck in the Suez Canal.
No, I believe it's in it. I've got my comps.
Oh, okay.
I think there was an email from Gary at Dead Reckoning to say, yes, don't worry, it's off the boat and you'll be getting them soon. It's a great looking book. Actually, they've done a lovely job. It's a natural fit for them, for a war comics publisher. And just as with the Night Witches, they did a lovely job taking the 3 series and putting them together and creating one kind of overarching narrative. Well, they've done the same thing with this, and it really is a pleasure to see all Carlos artwork properly on the series, properly collected. He did a wonderful job on the book. I'm just happy to see it. I'm happy to see it out there.
And you had worked with him at 2000 AD and also other DC stuff, right?
Yeah.
He's done some other war stuff. So it was never like you didn't have to twist his arm. You didn't have to twist his arm to work with you, but did he really find himself like you? Did he find himself gravitating more towards the realistic stuff over the superhero stuff? Not that 2000 AD was superheroes, but I mean, like was that his more? Did he enjoy that more, or was it just all kind of the same to him?
I think he did tend to shy away from traditional American costume superheroes. I think that's definitely true. Beyond that, Carlos could handle and was happy to handle most things: war stories, horror, crime, outright comedy. It was his range as much as his actual art style and his ability that appealed to me. He could really handle anything. So the Tankies, you have quite a serious war story, but then on the other hand, you have something completely outrageous like Adventures in the Rifle Brigade, which was that Vertigo series we did, now published by Image. Or there was another one he did for me, a character called Kev, who was spun out of the Authority. And on that one, he took over from Glenn Fabry, but didn't miss a beat, just jumped in and got straight to work. Handled the character, the settings, everything with great aplomb, as you would expect from Carlos.
Right.
No, he was an absolute pleasure to work with. I miss him to this day. I'm going to go on missing him, both as a friend and as a collaborator. He's a great loss.
Yeah, it's nice. The collection from Dead Reckoning, obviously the stuff that we did with him that we collected in the Battlefields collections is a great remembrance, but I think all of that stuff in one nice volume is a nice remembrance of his work. Because his line, you talk about, and he wasn't a young man, but his line was still like amazing. I mean, he could still draw like it was 30 years ago. I mean, there was really very little difference in what he was putting out. That's for sure.
He handled it beautifully. And when you're writing a story like the Tankies, which is about British tank crews in a series of battles and campaigns towards the end of World War II and then in the Korean War, and you're essentially dealing with, on the one hand, a lot of hardware, which he was very good at, but you're also dealing with tank crews, which means 4 or 5 guys, generally white, all wearing the same uniform in the gloomy interiors of armored fighting vehicles. You need an artist who can really capture the characters and maintain them, and he could do that like almost nobody else. He was a real boon in that regard. Having just
rewatched Das Boot, and thinking about this, I would love to see you write a U-boat story that he drew, but obviously, that was a mistake.
The funny thing about that, it's funny you mentioned that, because the funny thing about doing a submarine story, about the idea of ever writing a submarine story, is the first thing I would think is, oh God, Das Boot. And how will I ever top that? How can I come anywhere near to capturing something quite as brilliantly as they did?
You're sad that they die at the end and they're the bad guys.
We are, of course, speaking here of the classic 1980s adaptation of the novel, not the more recent somewhat more peculiar effort,
Right.
which I do not recommend.
Right. And also for Dead Reckoning, you've got a new, you mentioned it at the top with PJ.
The String Dogs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. That's a graphic novel that came out, I think, last summer.
Oh, okay.
It's, as you say, the art's
Yeah. It was last year.
That's right. It was August, I think. Art's by PJ Holden. It's the story of the British Royal Navy Swordfish cruise. The Swordfish was this antiquated torpedo bomber, a biplane that the British employed right throughout the war. And really, it looks like a leftover from World War I. It doesn't look like it belongs in what was then a increasingly modern and technological war, and yet the British achieved great things with it. They took a big chunk out of the Italian fleet at Taranto in Italy, and they then disabled a famous German battleship called the Bismarck in mid-Atlantic. And the graphic novel covers these two engagements. In the third part of the book, we then see the Swordfish crews effectively biting off more than they can chew. As it says on the book, if you do the unlikely often enough, they'll ask you to do the impossible, and sadly, that's what happened. Anyway, the graphic novel attempts to capture these three engagements, these three battles, and tell the story of the Swordfish crews of the Second World War.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Bismarck, because I just saw on Turner Classics like a commercial for or a teaser for the I guess it's the black and white sinking of the Bismarck movie.
Yeah,
I don't know that I've ever seen it, but in the trailer, the teaser, you see all these biplane looking planes, and I thought, oh yeah, they probably did have some of that hardware around, right?
Those are the aircraft that took part in the sinking of the Bismarck. That's not a bad movie, actually. It's a bit clunky because it's a 1950s British war movie. Right. But it's brilliantly acted. You've got Kenneth More in the lead, and it captures the action reasonably well.
Yeah, I realized I'd never seen it. I'll have to add it to my viewing. And you've got some stuff, I think, coming up from AWA and from Aftershock.
That's right. From AWA, there's Marjorie Finnegan, Temporal Criminal, which is what it sounds like. It's about a woman called Marjorie Finnegan who travels up and down the time lane stealing things and having a whale of a time. And the art on that is by Goran Sudzuka, who did such a good job for me on A Walk Through Hell. And from Aftershock, there'll be another series of Jimmy's Bastards. This one's called Jimmy's Little Bastards. And the other book, which I'm just finishing up this afternoon, actually, is called The Lion and the Eagle. And that's PJ. They trained and then sent large bodies of troops behind enemy lines by glider and by transport aircraft to make a mess of the Japanese installations that were in Burma at the time. Things got a bit messy, and they ended up having to fight their way out. It's one of those kind of military controversies that's never been satisfactorily resolved over the years, but it's something that's fascinated me. Generally, I think that when people look at the war in the Far East in World War II, they tend to think in terms of the atomic bombs. And anyone who knows more than that can maybe talk a little bit about the American island battles as the Marines hopped their way across the islands on the way towards the Japanese home islands. But there was a great deal more to the war against Japan. The British were fighting in Burma. The Chinese in particular were having a rough time of it. Of course, their problem, and I touch on this in the book, was that they were in the middle of a civil war at the same time between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists and Mao Zedong's communists. At the time, of course, no one knew where that was going to go, but it certainly made fighting the Japanese a bit more complex.
you like ghost stories? I hope so. My name is Lawrence, a husband and a father. In life, I was a professor of religious literature and history. If I was still alive, I guess I'd still be all of those things. But I'm not. I'm dead. Like I said, ghost story. Believe me, I never imagined I'd be here, helping others heal in the afterlife. So where is here? This is the scene. It's the middle place where souls must confront the traumas of their past. Here I lead souls away from their demons that haunt them. I must also defend these lost souls from others who would prey on them. To do this, I use the power of the Staff of Truth to help them break free. It isn't easy. Clearly, they need help and hope, and that's where I come in. I am a guide of souls. I'm the shepherd.
Yeah, I was, as you it seems like you're never going to run out of, you in particular, are never going to run out of material from that era because it covered, I mean, everything imaginable. I guess that's what a world war will do. But it literally every part of the globe, every person, every country in some form or fashion, there's was touched by something going on in that period that you can then say, oh, this is an interesting thing.
That's true. That's very true. There are a great many stories, but I also find it interesting to consider what it was like for people at the time who don't have our cumulative knowledge, who don't know how the following 80 years are going to go. Right. And let's say, by 1943, you can be roughly confident of Allied victory, but you don't know when. And you don't know what it's going to do to the world. You don't know about the post-war split between the Russians in the East and the Western allies. What you don't really know is the extent of the reverberations of World War II. You don't understand that we're going to be feeling the effects of it for decades to come, to this day, in fact.
Yeah, you and I've had this discussion many times, and it seems like, and my kids don't really have, and they're taught it in school, but they don't really have an understanding as much as I think our generation did of what all of that bears out, and it does seem that without giving that context and providing interesting ways to learn about it, it does get lost. That's
I think so. I think so. It's one of the reasons I'm drawn to writing about the Second World War. I think, as you and I have talked about before, we are losing that generation. They're almost gone. Right. But considering that they gave us the world that we have, and for those of us in the West, that worked out quite well, I think their stories are worth preserving.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you're the only guy in comics doing it. I mean, I don't think there's anyone else doing it. That's for sure.
I think there are a few others. The real problem for a lot of people is how do they make it pay at least well enough to do more? Right.
Yeah. You've gotten to the spot where you can work that in with other stuff, and do the things that you want to keep doing. Speaking of other stuff, I know last time I saw you, or maybe sometime last year, we were talking about formats, and you had handed me two big bricks. One is that big Hellblazer brick, and the other is that big Preacher. And I think that second Preacher brick is coming out soon, or is about to be out.
It's coming out this summer, and that'll basically collect the rest of the run. And got a very nice intro on that one from Jimmy and Amanda, actually.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, they did a really good job on it. So it's nice, actually, because, of course, book one, you had that excellent intro by Brian. Brian Vaughan, and now we've got Palmiotti and Connor doing
now known as Palmiotti.
Yeah.
And eventually, when DC wants to go to one collection, it'll be you'll have to have it airdropped.
It'll be known as the Crippler, the Rupturer, the Killer. Yeah.
So, hey, Vincent. So, hey, Vincent, why don't we go to some Twitter questions for Mr. Ennis, if you would, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, we put the word out across the interwebs for some questions, and we've got some that you'll have some fun with, some that may be challenging to answer, and some we'll go along. So
I did do a pass on these, so we didn't let anything insane go through. So
and on some of these, I'll try and mention who asked it. So Diego asks, will there possibly be more stories of Hitman or Section 8? Because you did mention earlier on this show that is one of the things that you have technically returned to.
Yeah. I'd like to think I'd also, I'd always drop into Noonan's bar. There've been a couple of, I did that one short story last year where Darkseid finds himself in a drinking competition with Baitor. That's the kind of thing I'd like to do. There's a few questions about those characters I'd like to answer. So yes, from time to time, you'll see the occasional thing.
One thing I didn't mention up top, and we'll I think there's a question that mentions it, is that you're doing a Batman story with our mutual friend, lovable Liam Sharp.
That's right. That's right. Well, that one has kind of an odd history, actually, because I wrote that story about 5 years ago, and it was actually for Steve Dillon.
That's right.
Yeah, Steve had been ill for a while, but you might remember, he was on his way back.
Mm-hmm.
He did some Punisher stuff and a couple of other things, and his art was, as good as it had ever been. And I thought, the thing to do to sort of help him get back to where he belonged was to do the most commercially appealing project I could possibly think of. And at the time, the Preacher TV show was about to come out, and I thought, well, what's more commercial than that? The Preacher team on Batman.
Right.
I mean, I suppose I could have. What's bigger than Batman? X-Men, maybe.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have done that. That
Spider-Man, but yeah.
I would have blown my brains out attempting to do that. But Batman, I've read great Batman comics. I love The Dark Knight. I loved Year One. So I thought, let's do this, and let's just get the thing out there, and let's get Steve back in the public eye. Turned out there was a flaw in the plan. Put another way, you write some people 6 issues of Batman, and then you never hear from them again. But that.
Right. Had Steve ever drawn Batman before? He maybe here and there, but not like an actual series or anything, right? I don't think so.
Must have done at some point, no? Well, anyway, the scripts then lay around for a few years, and then Marie Javins, who had been involved with the thing from the beginning, she had a brainwave, let's get Liam on it. And, Liam and I have known each other 30 years. It's just somehow we've never worked together. He was coming to the end of Green Lantern, I think, with Grant. And so it lined up nicely. And I think he's now done 2 issues worth. He's having a great time. He's having an absolute ball with it, doing amazing stuff. And that, I think, is out in the summer.
Yeah, I think they just solicited it. So, and I'm sure I don't know that I think I've seen Grant's scripts floating around. Like, I've never worked with Grant in that sense, but I think he's more from the Alan Moore school, whereas you are not from the Alan Moore school of scripts. So I'm sure Liam is probably spending a little less time reading script pages and a little bit more time drawing, perhaps. But
well, among Liam's first jobs in comics would have been Judge Dredd. I don't think that's where he started, but very early on he was drawing Judge Dredd, and John Wagner was writing those. And I based my scripts when I started writing on John's, because they're so simple. They tell you everything you need to know and nothing else. So I think Liam will at least be familiar enough with them.
And we've talked about this. There's different approaches that Matt Wagner from the American side. Matt Wagner writes very similar. Usually, there's who's going to be drawing it. you know,
Right.
and so you don't have to give a lot of information to the artist because you have a confidence in the artist that he's going to know what
Yeah.
the street is in New York or wherever it is. Whereas, you know, it over scripting, and it's not a negative, but is more just creating more of the experience. I think that, again, Alan Moore famously is known for in the density of his scripts. And the funny thing is his daughter, because I've worked with Leah and her husband, they write the same way, very dense. I mean, epic. The scripts are books in and of themselves. So
yeah, I've seen Alan's scripts. Obviously, I saw quite a few of the ones on Providence, and the impression I had was that he does that to keep himself engaged.
Yeah,
in the moment, you know, in the scene that he's describing, he's just trying to keep himself engaged in the story.
Right. We went off on a tangent there, Vincent. So if you want to, here's the one. If he's going in order, here's the one I think you're going to enjoy. I don't want to set it up too much, but I looked at this question. I thought, this guy gets it. This guy knows who he's talking to.
All right. From Henrik, I believe. He asks, what would have happened in World War II if Germany would have streamlined armor production like the USSR did with T-34?
Oh, well, there are people who can answer with a great deal more expertise on this than I can, but
they're not here. So
I'm guessing that with all the ideas people have had involving Germany being a bit smarter about its war production, it would have extended the war, but I think ultimately the result would have been the same. Even if you go on for another year, you go into 1946, Germany is still dealing with finite resources. So it's eventually going to run out of things to build tanks and everything else with. Whereas, given that Germany can't get anywhere near the Russian or American production lines to disrupt them, there's just going to be American and Russian and British tanks pouring onto the battlefield for as long as they need to come. It's possible, I suppose, that Germany might, in some circumstance, have been able to fight the Allies to a standstill and sue for peace. But so long as Hitler was in charge, I find that unlikely. And given the sacrifices the Russians had made and the horrors that had been inflicted on them, I'm not sure they would have been in any mood to go for anything but unconditional surrender. So I suppose the short answer is it would have extended the war, but not really changed the result.
you like ghost stories? I hope so. My name is Lawrence, a husband and a father. In life, I was a professor of religious literature and history. If I was still alive, I guess I'd still be all of those things. But I'm not. I'm dead. Like I said, ghost story. Believe me, I never imagined I'd be here, helping others heal in the afterlife. So where is here? This is the scene. It's the middle place where souls must confront the traumas of their past. Here I lead souls away from their demons that haunt them. I must also defend these lost souls from others who would prey on them. To do this, I use the power of the Staff of Truth to help them break free. It isn't easy. Clearly, they need help and hope, and that's where I come in. I am a guide of souls. I'm the shepherd.
So there were Twitter questions and there were Facebook questions. One of the weirdo questions I left was a Facebook question, not a Twitter question. Twitter questions were fairly innocuous, but Emmanuel's just asking about boys omnibus hardcovers. And, you know, that I kind of talked about it earlier where we've talked about different formats. We have the omnibuses now. We may down the line, if it's in conjunction with season 3 or if it's in conjunction with some of the other things that Amazon is planning for the series, you know, put them into a different format, but all options are on the table. We've, you know, as Garth knows, a lot of publishers play around with formats. DC does a really good job with you know, doing different editions of what's the word, perennial material, you know, library type material with, you know, Preacher you had the original trades, then you had hardcovers, then you had absolutes, and then you had probably more hardcovers. And now they've, like I was joking when I said that, you know, they're going to distill it down into one volume, but they probably can't. I don't know that printing technology can get all of that into one, but they've gotten into 2, which is probably, you know, where they're going to end up at this point. So doing something like that with the boys is something we've talked about. We'll see if we actually do it. So yeah, if you want to skip over that one, I guess I covered it. So,
all right. Then we have a user asking, he may not be aware of something, but he's asking if you've ever considered writing a novel.
Yes, I have. I have a couple of ideas, and as soon as I get a spare moment or a spare year, I'm going to have a go at it. Yes.
It's funny you mentioned spare year, and I think last time I saw you, I had said, maybe I'd said it to Ruth, but it was like, I wish, you know, if I'd known it was going to be a year, there's a lot of other things I would have done with my time. I wouldn't have waited. I wouldn't have waited to paint my daughter's room or do an outside, you know what I mean? There's all these things I would have done.
Well, I mean, I've been pretty busy throughout the whole period. I think there was maybe about 3 or 4 weeks I wasn't working, although even then I was kind of keeping a couple of things on the boil. So this hasn't really been the time for me to just stop and do something completely different. But yeah, someday soon.
Yeah, that's what I realized. It's like, well, no, you didn't have any extra time. I mean, you maybe had more time where you weren't commuting or you weren't going out on the weekend, but you didn't have a lot of extra time. I mean, it was still, everything was still rolling. So Vincent, why don't you pick a couple of Facebook questions here to close it out? I don't know if we should do the I'll just throw the one that I left. I don't know what, you know, it's oddly phrased. Kirk asks, what's your favorite veal dish?
My favorite veal dish.
Is there one?
I don't remember the last time I ate veal. I have no particular preference, really. I mean, if you put it in front of me, I'll eat it. Peculiar question.
They've got. I think the Strip House has a veal chop, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, but I'm not going to eat veal at the Strip House when I can have the bone-in fillet or something like that.
So, Vincent, do you want to ask a couple of the Facebook questions, and then we'll close it up?
Yeah, sure. So James has a very classic, clever question. What is the one question you get asked every interview that you wish people would stop asking?
And was it asked in this interview?
There isn't one, really. I mean, if it's about a war story, it'll be, why do you do war stories? It used to be, why do you hate superheroes? And then I trot out, I do not hate superheroes. I hate their domination of the industry. I wish that we could see a great many more genres covered by comics, but unfortunately, because of the domination of blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But I can't really think of anything I really hate.
Hate's a strong word, James. Come on.
Yes. So on that note, we have from Bradley one that's worded a little bit interestingly, but kind of picking up from the last one. So he says, and I'm quoting, actually, I'll slightly change the wording, but he says, would you ever consider writing Superman in some way again, seeing as how you're writing a Batman story now? And at least he feels, and a lot of people in the press and in comics have often said that it seems people feel that Superman is one of the superheroes that you do like. I mean, there's the famous issue of Hitman, right, which people always look to.
Because every time Superman showed up in Hitman, he came off a bit like Jesus, really, which is a character I quite enjoy writing too. It's funny, I did the Batman story for what I've just explained were pretty cynically commercial reasons. Superman, yes, there is something about the character I like. I'm not sure why. It might be something to do with the kind of American symbolism that the character contains. Funny, I have no interest in Captain America at all. It might be something to do with, as I say, the messianic quality that the character has. I've thought about this. I wondered if maybe it was because I didn't read the comics as a kid, but I did see the movie with
Christopher Reeve.
Right, I was going to say fell off the horse, but Christopher Reeve.
Too soon.
Jesus. And I watched it again recently, and I thought, no, it couldn't have been that. It wasn't that.
That movie, if you're of a certain age, I mean, I saw that movie as a kid, and
yeah, so did I. I saw it when it came out.
It still does the things that it did at the time, and I get why it was a big deal.
But it hasn't stayed with me, and it's not the reason. It's not the reason I like Superman, which is what I'm trying to pin down.
Yeah.
But would I do it? I don't know. I don't have any particular story in mind, and as we were saying earlier, if you don't have a story, there's no point in doing it. I do remember some years ago Dan DiDio asking me to do it, and he said that his problem with Superman was that whoever he gave it to, they always ended up turning into the 5-year-old kid they were when they first read Superman. And he thought with me that wouldn't happen. And I mean, he's right to the extent that I wasn't a 5-year-old kid when I first read Superman. But I don't know that if he was expecting some sort of bloodbath, some sort of Superman as monster or war machine with his power harnessed for something more cynical than it usually is, he wouldn't have gotten that out of me either. Yeah. If I was to write the character, it would be like the Hitman appearances. But I just thought that was interesting in that he was looking for something that was perhaps a bit harder edged. Anyway, as it affects me writing the character, I don't know. Nothing is impossible, but it's not high on my list. There are other things to do.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Captain America, that you have no, and I get it why you wouldn't. But if he was on the table, the character was out of action from World War II through, the founding of the Avengers, right? So even if you extrapolate that timeline out to the founding of the Avengers not being in the 60s, but more like maybe the 70s or the 80s. But if Captain America had been in play with your Punisher stuff and with your Fury stuff, you could have actually thrown him in there to bounce against Nick. Or
it would have killed me to take something like My War Gone By, which is that Nick Fury story I did, and put this costume clown in the middle
but to play off to contrast the realities that you were portraying, not necessarily in that story, but to contrast the realities.
You mentioned reality. You see, as soon as you put that character into a story like that, you can kiss goodbye to reality.
Well, that's true.
Because you can take Nick Fury, who is, at the end of the day, an ordinary bloke. He's in very good shape and he's tactically brilliant, but he's an ordinary bloke. And you can make him a CIA officer coming out of the OSS post-World War II, and you can move him through Indochina, Cuba, Vietnam, and Central America, because that happened. But as soon as you put Captain America in there, this guy who's put together from a super soldier serum or something, that's it. That's everything you've done, everything you've tried to build out the window there and then.
Just a brief appearance. I'm just saying.
Maybe,
a panel or two, just to take the piss. Come on.
Maybe have someone wearing a T-shirt.
Yeah, there you go. Is there anything left on that list, Vincent?
Yeah, I'll skip the one kind of as we close things out. This is a more general one. For everyone watching, do you have any book or movie recommendations, either recent or things you're diving into from before?
All those movies that have been out in the theater for the last year. What's your favorite one?
Well, I tell you what I'm really enjoying watching at the minute is For All Mankind, which is, I think, in the middle of its second season. It's a great show. You don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but essentially what happens is that the Russians beat the Americans to the moon in 1969, and American society turns upside down. Nixon pulls the country out of the Vietnam War so that all the resources can be poured into winning what the space race then becomes. And soon you have a base on the moon. You have everything that was actually originally intended when they cut the Apollo program in the real world in the 70s. So you have this fascinating alternate universe in which the Russians and the Americans are continuing to colonize the moon, I suppose, and you see the changes in American society as a result. One of the things the Russians do, of course, is they put a woman on the moon, which means that the Americans have to do the same. So all of a sudden, the feminist movement gets a massive boost and is effectively becomes part of government policy, certainly as it pertains to the moon race. But yeah, it's just fascinating that one change, that one brick taken out of the wall, changes everything. It's a really good series. Highly recommend it.
Is that on Apple TV or
I believe so. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that maybe Ron Moore was
That's
showrunner or EP, the Battlestar Galactic, the Battlestar Galactic reboot. Yeah, I have not seen it. I'll have to check it out. Sounds cool.
I really recommend it. And in terms of what I'm reading, I'm currently in the middle of a biography of Thomas Cromwell by Dermot McCulloch. Thomas Cromwell was Henry VIII's enforcer. People who've read Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall novels or seen the excellent adaptation will know who Thomas Cromwell was, as will any scholar of Tudor times. But it's excellent. Although it's very, very dense. Beyond that, gosh, I've read some Joe Lansdale novels recently. I've really enjoyed, like More Better Deals and Jane Goes North.
He's got something new. He's got something new that he's
got, I think, a novel called Moon Lake coming up, and you can sign me up for that. Everything Lansdale does, I'm there for. And actually, those aforementioned Hilary Mantel novels, the Wolf Hall trilogy, are just absolutely brilliant. Some of the best writing I've seen in years.
Cool. And I think we covered all your comic projects, right? Did we miss anything?
Batman, Punisher, Marjorie Finnegan, Lion and the Eagle, Jimmy's Little Bastards. The one we didn't cover will occur to me about 5 minutes after this finishes.
We'll dub it in. We'll dub it in. So, well, thank you very much for your time. As always, pleasure to talk to you. Pleasure to see you. And
cheers.
We'll do it again soon.
All right. Take care, fellas. Cheers.
Thanks.
Do you like ghost stories? I hope so. My name is Lawrence, a husband and a father. In life, I was a professor of religious literature and history. If I was still alive, I guess I'd still be all of those things. But I'm not. I'm dead. Like I said, ghost story. Believe me, I never imagined I'd be here, helping others heal in the afterlife. So where is here? This is the scene. It's the middle place where souls must confront the traumas of their past. Here I lead souls away from their demons that haunt them. I must also defend these lost souls from others who would prey on them. To do this, I use the power of the Staff of Truth to help them break free. It isn't easy. Clearly, they need help and hope, and that's where I come in. I am a guide of souls. I'm the shepherd.